You're listening to the Love Your Neighbor podcast.
Well, thank you for joining us on the Links podcast. The Love Your Neighbor podcast is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Brandon Wellness. We're so glad to invest and build in the health and wellness of our community. And today we have a special guest, Jason Honey. Jason, thanks for joining us on the Links podcast.
I'm very happy to be here. This is something I thought I'd probably never be able to do, but I got to look up to people like you and people that do stuff like this. So this is awesome.
Well, it's interesting. We met early when we first moved to Brandon. We met early on. Our kids were on the same team. Kids are in the same class, and that's kind of how we met. Talk to those of us that don't know you in Brandon. Tell us about your family. Tell us about how you got to Brandon. Share that story with all of us.
Yeah, I actually grew up on the east side of Sioux Falls. So far east in that if you went down from my house down a little hill, you'd end up on Rice Street, just by that 229 interchange.
Okay.
If you now take that Rice Street and head into Brandon, go past Great Bear, go past 6 Mile Road, I now live in that development, the Bluffs right there, which is, I think I'm going to rename where we live the Bluffs, West Brandon or West River, so to speak. Right. West Creek, West River, whatever it is, because there's that group of people out in the east side that call it East Brandon. So I'm like, well, what are we out here? I feel like we're kind of detached, but
I do feel that the river kind of demarcates.
Yeah.
But we do have two rivers. That's interesting with Brandon. We have two rivers that divide our community. Both incredible, like canoeing, but we are. We are West Brandon.
Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful town. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had some issues, and I've been outspoken on social media before about the water. I've chimed in because I don't know. There's probably something wrong with me because I tell myself all the time, get off social media, stop doing those things, stop commenting. It doesn't do any good. But I see something, I'm like, I got to comment on that. Why do I do that? I don't know.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that's a great question because growing up in the time that we grew up, things got dealt with in social circles, whether it was at churches, barbershops, lunch counters, in all of these, at bars. Those things in many ways are going away in our culture, and we have this thing called social media where everybody has a platform. Everybody has a platform, and I think there's some really negative things about that. But there also are some incredibly positive things. Voices are given to people that, guys like me, jokers like me, we get to have a conversation. We get to talk about things, and I think it's a blessing, and that's why we're doing this podcast, is because we want to be building community. And community is just really, it's common thkind that we share.
Yeah, and can I say I'm a big fan of this podcast.
Oh.
Since it started, and I started following. It was nice to, I kind of think I knew that person. I've heard that name before, and when I grew up, like I said, I only live as the crow flies, like a mile from where I grew up now, my childhood home and my home now. We used to come to Brandon, to maybe play some pickup basketball outside at the park, or you knew some kids from Brandon, but it was so detached and so small back then. And now it's the growth, and we've only been in Brandon maybe 15 years-ish.
Okay.
But the growth I've seen just in that 15 years has been amazing. Yeah. And you talk to people, they want to say, well, Brandon's part of Sioux Falls. And I always tell them, well, I feel like T and Harrisburg are more a part of Sioux Falls. We have this valley and the river. I feel like we've always been a little more, you got to go through the woods really, over the river and through the woods to get to Brandon, right?
Correct.
So. Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that, Brandon, of the communities, Jeremy Risty was on our podcast, and he's the president of the Historical Society. But Brandon people have been living in Brandon for 150 years. Almost as long as Sioux Falls has been populated. People have been settling in our area because it was that short 5-minute drive from the feeder slaughterhouse. It's a 5-mile carriage ride, and then you hop the river, and we're in Brandon.
Right there, yeah. I think there's something at the Big Sioux Rec area, that old wood house there or whatever. There's probably a plaque out there you can read a little bit about, like, possibly the first settler of Brandon area.
Yep.
right?
Yeah, there is so much history to our community, and for folks like me that have moved in from out of state.
Mm-hmm.
But you grew up in Sioux Falls.
Mm-hmm.
What you said 15 years. What was it that drew you to Brandon, Jason? How did you decide, hey, we're gonna live and be Brandon people?
Yeah, when my wife and I first looking for a home, we had just had our youngest son, Brecken, and we were renting at the time, and we decided, we had needed a house. So we started looking around, and we looked at the, Sioux Falls, Harrisburg, Brandon. We were going to stay in the area, obviously, because that's where we live and work, and that's where my family is and such. We just found a house in Brandon, so I guess this is the house we like the most. But we also had told ourselves, there's something about that we weren't comfortable with in maybe T or Harrisburg, or maybe the one in Sioux Falls it didn't feel right. So, when you, I guess you just put in a little bit of faith, there was something about Brandon that just said, yes, it checked this box, or that we liked the community, and I guess maybe there was something from my childhood. I grew up close enough to Brandon. There was something about Brandon that I liked. So it just all came together, I think. And, it felt good at the time, and it still feels good today.
Yeah. Where is your wife from, the Sioux Falls area as well, or?
She moved around a lot. She had a dad growing up who was a pastor, but he moved around a lot, different churches. So she really calls home North Dakota. The Ashley, North Dakota area is where she spent a lot of years growing up, but she also spent some time in Kansas, Wisconsin, Michigan. Okay. But she actually graduated high school from down in the Gregory, Winter Colomb area.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So she does have some beautiful parts of the country.
Oh yeah.
Ashley, North Dakota.
Yeah.
I'm a North Dakota guy. People always give me a hard time about being from North Dakota, and I say, wow, you're just jealous.
Yeah. She tells me there's some Ray Nitschke blood in that area of the neck of the woods. Her grandma's German, who she adored her grandma, and speaks a lot about her. I met her maybe one time before she had passed, but so yeah, a big person in her life was her grandma, and I think there's that German heritage. I think from that.
Very North Dakota, much like communities around Sioux Falls, very very ethnic, because in that time of immigration. I mean, people came over and they could kind of, take land and, homestead land, and they would settle with all of their family, relatives, and people that spoke their language. So North Dakota, obviously that's true in a lot of places, but in North Dakota, those are communities. That's a little bit of the Brandon story. Tell me, Jason, a little bit now. You've come to be a part of this community. What is it that you love most about being a dad and a resident of Brandon? What's the thing that goes, man, I love being here? What's your favorite thing about it?
I think that it's just, it's not too big. And I spent my whole life in Sioux Falls, and so did my parents, so I really, really love Sioux Falls. But there's just something that's a part of me that always wanted to be in a smaller community, I think, especially when you meet people when you go to college that are from Freeman, South Dakota, my best friends, right? And the stories they had about growing up with their friend groups in a smaller town. So sometimes, I'll ruffle a few feathers and say Brandon's too big, or it's gotten too big, and gosh, I'd like to live in a Garrettson or a Baltic or a really, really small community. But I'm not the type of person that just makes quick decision that gets up and moves easy. I think I've been in Brandon long enough now that I know what's happening inside me is I'm growing roots, the school system, and everybody tells you, wow, Brandon, the first thing they tell you is, well, the schools are really good out there, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, I've never had any issues, and my sons go there, and I think I love the sports programs. I love that they really get behind it, and I like the downtown Brandon. I know not a lot of people visit downtown Brandon. There's not a lot to do there, but that's what really feels like a small town Brandon. When you go down there and meet some people downtown, you'll get stories of, I've lived here my whole life. Right. They've seen the changes, and that's kind of what really grabs me is when you meet people, and I'm not a historian by trade, but I love history. So that's kind of what brought me to do what I've been doing for 15, 16 years at Trail Ridge is I love talking to people who've been there, done that, have some history, older adults, those sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. We were just talking about this. Becky Blue was on the podcast, and by the time this airs, you'll have all heard from Becky's story. But that older generation, when you come to Brandon, one of the mantras is it's all about the kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the kids. And that is true. That is true. We invest in our kids. But there's something that happens between the time they graduate and the time they get married or start having kids. There's a transition that happens there. And talk to us a little bit about your interest in the older generation, because being a pastor, I love the wisdom that we get from those
Mm-hmm.
folks that have gone ahead of us. What is the greatest benefit for you to working with an older population, with a senior population, I guess we'd say?
It's really hard to put in just a few words, but it's just something that I think you have inside you that you've always, I was a weird kid, or when I was growing up, when I was graduating high school, going to college, when everybody was listening to this type of music, for some reason, I was watching those Time Life, the super hits from the 50s and 60s. And I fell in love with that type of music. So here's a freshman in college in the early 90s who's listening to 50s and 60s music. My friends couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain it. It was just something that grabbed me.
Yeah.
And to this day, if we fast forward all the way out, what do I watch on Netflix? World War II history type stuff. What was one of my best subjects in school that wasn't gym class? History, right?
Sure.
So I've just always had an affinity for things from the past, nostalgia, those sort of things.
Yeah.
But I don't antique. I don't go looking for that sort of stuff.
Sure.
That's not my thing, but I want to know about the history. I think it's important too. I think it's important to know where those people came from, what they saw, what they've passed on to us. And, it's an important piece of us.
Yeah, that's so true. And I have the privilege too of getting to know folks that have lived some life and they have some experiences. One of the main reasons I wanted to have you on this podcast, not just because we are neighbors and we have certain things in common, but I did hear, and this was on social media, I heard about your story about being a donor, and it really touched my heart when I read that, and I wanted you to share that story because I really believe that we have lots of places where we can serve and we can give, but you've given something. And there are some people obviously probably that know this, but would you tell a story of kind of how that all came together and then making the decision to donate a kidney?
Yeah.
It's like I want you to tell that story. So
yeah, no, and it's been told a little bit in the Brandon paper, and I've certainly had my face on TV now a couple times because of it, and boy, there's a lot of things that really go into this, and like I told you before we started, and you may know what it really boils down to. I think for me is I wanted to do something in my life that I felt like I now have a story. I've always had a piece of me that has daydreamed about what if I was in a situation and I had to save a life, or, how would I handle that? Certainly I've always grown up with a mom who's always been very giving in her time. We didn't grow up rich, or we didn't have money to donate. So, and I think I'm in the same position. I don't have millions of dollars to give to families in need or the church or other organizations. What I do have apparently is a healthy body. And I come to find out I had a kidney that was a really good match for somebody I knew a little bit. It wasn't a hard decision. It really wasn't a hard decision because, like I said, I think there's something in me that kind of wanted to be somebody else's hero or save a life or have a lifelong story that I could come to somebody like you and tell and maybe get the word out to others.
Yeah.
I know for a fact I am probably very misunderstood as a person. And I do that to myself, right? Like I do all these things in life and I say all these things. And we talked about social media and most people, even my friends, some of my closer friends are blown away that I would do something like this, or that I, Jason Honey did that. So part of that is part of the reason I did that too, is because I love the shock of, you really don't know me.
Wow.
You really don't know me, because I'll just tell you a quick side story to giving or to donating. I grew up, I threw pennies in a, those old tin garbage cans with a football team, right? I had the Dallas Cowboys in my room. I'm not even a Cowboys fan today, but I must have grew up. My mom must have thought I was a Cowboys fan. Here's a garbage can. I had that thing 3/4 full. It must have weighed about 110 to 20 pounds, full of pennies.
Wow.
In my room, and I'd grown up now. I'm at college. I'm not living with my parents anymore, but I still had my childhood room at my parents' house. Well, there was a radio station doing a penny drive. We're collecting your pennies. Come drop them off at the radio station and you might win a prize or something. I'm like, what are these pennies? What good are they doing us in this house just sitting there for years? I wheelbarrowed them into the radio station and they were like, whoa, hold on. These are my pennies. There's like 100. I don't know what it's worth. I don't know how much money it is if I took it to the bank, but here's 120 pounds of pennies. Go ahead, because they're going to some donation. It's just a donation. Yeah. I do that with clothes. Here's clothes. I grew up, if a buddy needed to borrow a sweatshirt or a coat, my mom was constantly, where's that sweatshirt I bought you or that coat? I'm like, well, someone need to borrow it. I don't know. It's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. These are our possessions, right? These are a big deal.
Right,
These are ours, and I guess, I don't know. I can't explain it fully, but there's something in me that just wants to give away my stuff. Probably because, like I said, I don't feel like I can write you a check for $1,000, $1 million, whatever. If I could, I would. I promise you that.
Right.
All that lottery talk. What would you do if you won the lottery? I'm like, oh my God, I could give so much money away, right? And help so many different organizations. Yeah. But as it is, I can only give away pennies and kidneys right now.
Yeah, it's a spiritual discipline to give. Mm-hmm. It aligns us with our Creator when we give, because God He is giving. He is love. It's what He does. It's His essence. Mm-hmm. And so as we, as human beings created in His image, we are imaged or imagined to be givers. And so when you or I or anyone gives without any hope of return or I'm going to get credit for this, when you do that, you are fully living out, who you were made to be. And I think it's just, I'm an adventure guy. I like to do stuff to say I did it. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's interesting. It's how we, as maybe we could say men, we have these different things. We got itches we got to scratch, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really, that's inspiring to me that you would say, hey, going from giving all those pennies to giving, what was that like physically for you? Talk about that journey. And maybe, I guess I have not seen so there's been some news pieces on it.
Yeah, I've had, my recipient, Brandy's her name.
Okay.
She had a story that was on Dakota News Now.
Okay.
Well ahead of when I ever donated this kidney. Because she had actually needed a kidney and had a brother who was the perfect match. So, here's this family. This is usually how these things work. Her brother donated her a kidney. She's got 2 non-working kidneys. Her brother donated her a kidney, and it was the perfect match. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. And that small, itty-bitty, less than 1% thing that could happen, happened. Oh, wow. Her body rejected her brother. So here's her brother, who loves her and would do anything for her, gave her a kidney that eventually now didn't work. Oh, so she had to start back at square one. And I knew about that through the news story. They did a story on her, and then she put a call out on social media, on Facebook, to, let everybody know that, if you want to get checked out, if you want to get tested, I now need a kidney again, because this was what happened with my brother. And here's me sitting here going, right away, feeling bad for Brandy, who I know a little bit. And I'll tell you that story in a little bit. But her brother, how heart-wrenching. I have a sister, a younger sister, would do the same things he did, and what that must feel like to be able to give of yourself, and then that happens. So I have a lot of, and he doesn't know this, and we don't talk much. I know him a little bit, but I have a lot of emotions and feeling for him, to what he went through.
Right.
Here I went through, I thought this was pretty easy, actually, to donate a kidney to somebody. And here I am today talking about it, and my health is amazing. But what it must have felt like for him to go through the same things I had to go through, and then for it to not work for his sister.
Wow. Wow. You've got, you can empathize with that. You have that same experience. So we'll have to link those stories, because I didn't realize that whole story. I just saw it. I think it was on your social media where I first heard about it. So we'll have to link those stories here. But I love the heart of that, of saying, hey, there's a lot of things I can't do.
Right.
But here's something I can do.
Right.
And how would you, and I want to just close by this question, because I think we're building Brandon Wellness and the Links podcast, we're building community. And what you said earlier is so important. You don't know me. You know, you had mentioned that earlier. And we can't know each other through, a little bit through social media. But how do you define community? As you're actively building community, you work for a retirement community. What have you learned about community that you could apply, or we have in Brandon?
Boy, tough question. Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that I work for a place that we call a community.
Yeah.
A community of people that, kind of share a love for each other, are very faith-based, but also have a lot of very good stories. So what community? We need to get off social media more, because we think that we know somebody through social media and what they say and what they do. I've always been at least enough of a realist to know that even if we think we know somebody, like I think I know you and your family a little bit through church and the neighbors and, the coaching of football earlier. And we really don't know somebody behind closed doors. There's so much more. There's so many more layers to us as humans that we get to see them out in Brandon. Our kids play football together or basketball together. We get to know them in some circles because we spend some time on weekends with them. We maybe do travel baseball with them. We're around hotels with them, but there is so much more to people and their interactions in their life. You always see the stuff on social media that goes around a lot now. And I think it's important when it talks about, depression, and you may see a happy face and you may see a person that's donated a kidney, but you don't fully know what goes on inside them.
Right.
And I think that's me. Like I said earlier, I don't think people really know me. I think sometimes my parents, who know me the best, and my wife, I surprise them, because there's a lot of self-talk that goes on in here. I tell myself stuff. I sometimes ask myself, why did I do this? Well, part of it is, I think I've told myself that, one, I wanted to have that story. You mentioned something earlier, it's giving with expecting nothing in return.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a little bit of a dreamer, John. I think that there's part of me that says, well, I did something so good. Maybe I erased at least one of those sins as a childhood, right? Can we take one off the board? Like if we have the list, the pros and the cons, can I erase one of the negatives maybe? There's part of me that thinks maybe that could happen, but really what it was Brandy's husband and I played some slow pitch softball together. And that's a real macho thing for guys in their early 30s. We're better than you are. So we played against each other. We had a few butting heads, and I had actually went up to him, because he's a tall guy like me. He's really reserved and quiet, and I just really liked how he carried himself. And I told him, I go, Scott, I wish because he pitches slow and I pitch, and I wish I could be like you. I'm animated and excited and emotional, and when I'm doing things, and that's how I want to play sports. I got to get my juices going. How do you play sports and just go, whatever? So I said, I really like what you do. I kind of want to be more like you, right?
Yeah.
So what went from was kind of a rivalry and kind of we don't know each other. Do we not like each other? To we became friends. And then when his wife and I and him had all hung out and they went to a couple concerts, we became a little closer friends, but we weren't lifelong friends. We weren't hang out all together people. She put out a calling. I said to my wife, I should at least go get tested. That's what you do when you're going to donate a kidney. You don't have to know somebody like I did. You should go get tested, because there's like 90,000 some people on the kidney list right now. And there's maybe only 5,000 active donors.
Wow.
And it can really, it can save a life. For me, it was kind of nice that I went to go get tested knowing that I should probably get my name crossed off of, her list, so I can at least say I did that. At least I hate Brandy. I tried. I'm not a match.
Right.
Well, it turns out, test again. Holy cow.
Yeah.
I'm your match. This is going to work. It's me after all that. So, yeah.
That's a fantastic. And I think it's even just the thought of like going through that and doing that for someone that, we just observed Veterans Day. And that idea of service and giving ourselves is so integral into who we are. And I think about those, my friends and family that have served in seas, and here's you've served by just simply giving the gift of life to someone else. It's an amazing thing. Well, we're going to have to do this. Maybe this is a little emerging part of this podcast is let's put stories to profiles. Let's get people off social media and get them in here and get to know them a little bit, because I think I'm not on social media that often, so I don't totally live in that. I don't get that, but I do know there's obviously in Brandon, it's really a huge part of why we started this podcast, because we want people to have full conversations rather than there's just comment, respond. Because here we can have a real conversation, and hopefully this conversation will lead to more conversation.
Yeah, like you said, when you meet with people, when you talk with people, it's the relationships, but you get a different side of them, but you also you develop a connection with them. I always think about politics and where we're at right now. There's such division. But if you, me, and a few other people got in a room and we didn't talk politics, we're going to love each other based on some current things that we both agree on and conversations that we're going to have. It's just social media is a really good tool, but I think we're using it wrong.
Yeah. It certainly can be. So, well, hey, Jason, thank you so much for coming on, and appreciate you and your family. And let's stay on the west side. Hey, West Side Brandon.
West Side Brandon. All right, man. Yeah, you bet.
All right, thanks, Jason.
Thank you for joining us on the Love Your Neighbor podcast. The purpose of the Love Your Neighbor podcast is to build community one conversation at a time. You can help us build that community by sharing the podcast on your social media channels and rating our podcast on whatever platform you're listening from. Another way is to let us know of any neighbors who have a story. Go Lynx!